There are moments in a band's history that explode in headlines, dominate conversations, and define entire eras in a single night. And then, there are moments that happen quietly, almost unnoticed, yet end up determining whether that band survives at all. And if you look closely at Kiss in the mid-1980s, right after the instability, right after another guitarist disappeared almost as quickly as he arrived, what you are really seeing is not just another lineup change. You are looking at a survival decision. Because before Bruce Kulick became one of the longest-serving guitarists in Kiss history, he entered the band at a time when stability mattered more than image, more than personality, and more than legacy. And here's the part most people don't fully recognize. Kiss didn't need another star. They needed someone who wouldn't break. Bruce Howard Kulick was born on December 12, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, into an environment where music was not just something you listened to, but something that shaped daily life. And that distinction matters because Bruce was not developing in isolation. His older brother, Bob Kulick, was already working inside the professional music world, already connected to major artists, already navigating the realities of sessions, contracts, and expectations, which meant Bruce's education in music was not built on fantasy. It was built on exposure. And exposure creates a different kind of discipline, because when you grow up watching how the industry actually works, you don't just learn how to play, you learn how to survive. And that survival instinct would define Bruce Kulick long before Kiss ever entered his story. By the late 1970s, Bruce was already working with serious artists, and one of the most defining chapters of his early career came when he toured with Meat Loaf during the Bat Out of Hell era, a period that would go on to sell tens of millions of copies worldwide and establish itself as one of the most successful albums in rock history. This was not a stepping stone, this was pressure, because performing in that environment requires more than talent. It demands consistency, endurance, and the ability to deliver the same level of performance night after night, regardless of fatigue, regardless of travel, regardless of circumstance. And Bruce delivered. But here's where the story becomes more layered, because Meat Loaf was only one part of his foundation. He also recorded and toured with Blackjack, a professional outfit with label support, featuring a pre-solo Michael Bolton, which meant Bruce was never drifting between opportunities. He was building a career with intention. And that distinction becomes critical later, because when Kiss needed someone to stabilize their situation, they were not looking for potential. They were looking for proof. But here's what most people overlook. Bruce Kulick's connection to Kiss didn't begin when he joined the band. It began years earlier, quietly, indirectly, but significantly. His brother Bob Kulick had long-standing ties to Kiss, including auditioning for the band before Ace Frehley officially joined. Bob did not become a member, but he remained connected, through session work, through collaborations with Gene Simmons, through the kind of ongoing relationship that only exists when trust has already been earned over time. And that relationship had a direct effect on Bruce. Because Bob didn't just know Kiss from the outside. He knew how they operated, what they demanded, what they would and would not tolerate. That connection placed Bruce closer to Kiss than most outsiders. Close enough that when the moment came, he wasn't stepping into something unknown. He was stepping into something familiar. The year was 1984, and this is where everything changes. Not gradually, but decisively. Kiss had released Animalize, an album that carried aggressive energy and commercial intent. But behind that release was a situation that was already unstable. Mark St. John had been brought in as the lead guitarist, and while he contributed to the album, his ability to perform live was severely impacted by reactive arthritis, a condition that limited his mobility and made consistent touring extremely difficult. And touring is where Kiss existed. It is where they generated revenue, where they maintained visibility, and where they reinforced their identity as a live band. So when Mark St. John could not continue reliably, Kiss faced a problem that was not theoretical. It was immediate, and it was serious. And this is where Bruce Kulick enters the story. Not as a headline, not as a long-term plan, but as a solution. On September 30th, 1984, Bruce Kulick stepped onto the stage with Kiss for the first time during the Animalize tour, and there was no extended introduction, no gradual transition, no safety net, just a performance that had to work, and it did. But here's the critical turning point. Bruce wasn't just capable, he was consistent. And in a band that had just experienced instability in the lead guitar position, consistency was not a bonus. It was everything. By December 7th, 1984, Bruce Kulick officially signed with Kiss, and just one day later, he appeared in the Detroit performance that would become Animalize Live Uncensored, effectively establishing him as the band's new lead guitarist. And from that moment forward, Bruce Kulick was no longer a temporary solution. He was the structure holding the system together. But here's where the picture becomes more complex. Because Bruce Kulick's role inside Kiss was fundamentally different from the guitarists who came before him. He was not asked to replicate Ace Frehley. He was not brought in to imitate the past. He was allowed to play as himself. That single decision shaped the entire non-makeup era of Kiss. Through albums like Asylum, Crazy Nights, Hot in the Shade, and Revenge, Bruce contributed to a period where Kiss was redefining its sound, adapting to changing trends in rock music, and attempting to remain relevant in an industry that was evolving rapidly. And throughout that evolution, Bruce remained a constant presence, not the loudest, not the most visible, but the most reliable. And reliability, in this context, becomes a form of leadership. Because while the spotlight often focuses on personalities, it is consistency that sustains momentum. And Bruce Kulick provided that consistency for over a decade. What happened next would change the direction of the band entirely. In 1995, Kiss appeared on MTV Unplugged, a performance that brought together the current lineup and original members Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, creating a moment that resonated deeply with fans. Not because it was designed as a reunion, but because it revealed something that had never fully disappeared, the connection to the original lineup. And that moment changed the direction of the band, because what followed was not just a creative decision, it was a strategic one. In 1996, Kiss launched the reunion tour, bringing back the original members in full makeup, restoring the visual identity that had defined their peak success, and generating massive commercial results that confirmed the demand for nostalgia. This was not a small shift. This was a complete realignment of the band's identity. And here's the reality. When that decision was made, there was no longer a place for Bruce Kulick in the active lineup. But the exit deserves a closer look, because the way this moment is often told can become distorted. Bruce Kulick was not fired in the traditional sense. There is no credible evidence of conflict, breakdown, or failure that led to his exit. Instead, Bruce himself has explained that he was left behind as the band pursued the reunion. Think about what that means for a moment. Over a decade of reliability, over a decade of showing up, night after night, album after album, without missing a date, without causing a crisis. And then the phone stops ringing. Not because you failed, but because the story changed around you. And when you look at the scale of that reunion success, the reasoning becomes clear. This was not about replacing a guitarist. This was about restoring a brand. And in that context, Bruce Kulick's role became unnecessary, not because of what he lacked, but because of what the band chose to become. But here's where the story doesn't end. Because Bruce Kulick did not disappear from Kiss history. In 1998, he contributed to Psycho Circus, co-writing Dreamin' and performing bass on multiple tracks, confirming that his relationship with the band remained intact even after the reunion reshaped its public image. And that detail matters, because it shows that Bruce was not removed from the narrative. He was repositioned within it. After Kiss, Bruce continued his career with Union and later became the lead guitarist for Grand Funk Railroad, holding that position for over 2 decades, reinforcing a key truth that often gets overlooked. Bruce Kulick did not need Kiss to validate his career. He had already built something sustainable. But before the conclusion, consider the full arc. Bruce Kulick entered Kiss at a moment of instability. He remained through a period of transition. And he exited, not through failure, but because the band chose a different path, which leads to a conclusion that is not dramatic, but is undeniable. Bruce Kulick was the guitarist who kept Kiss functioning when consistency mattered more than identity. Not louder, not more visible, but essential. Because without stability, the band does not survive long enough to reach the reunion. And without reaching the reunion, the legacy looks very different. So when you evaluate Bruce Kulick's place in Kiss history, the question is not whether he replaced someone. The question is whether the band could have continued without him. And based on the timeline, the answer becomes clear. But the next chapter belongs to someone else, because the next guitarist would not be asked to stabilize Kiss. He would be asked to represent it. And that is where Tommy Thayer enters the picture. Bruce Kulick's story is not built on spectacle, and it does not rely on controversy. And it does not need exaggeration to feel important, because what he represents is something far more difficult to recognize in real time. He represents the kind of contribution that does not demand attention, but quietly holds everything together while attention is focused elsewhere. And when Kiss chose to return to its original identity, when the makeup came back, when the brand reasserted itself, and when nostalgia became the driving force behind the band's direction, Bruce Kulick did not collapse under that shift. He stepped aside, not as a failure, not as a casualty, but as a professional who understood exactly what had changed. That understanding is what separates his story from so many others, because Bruce Kulick was never chasing the spotlight. He was maintaining the structure behind it. It is why his legacy does not fade when the image changes. It remains steady, consistent, and essential. Because before Kiss could become what it was again, it had to survive what it had become. And Bruce Kulick is one of the reasons it did.